intimacy has changed, or our transaction of intimacy has changed, if at all, if it has, with the introduction of the concretion, right, of taking, making, but also being able to transmit a photo through a little handheld phone device. I interestingly was not, in any way the only artist in that show who was confronting new media by problematizing the extent to which it's new at all. And so the little boxes that you saw on the table have side by side an original Polaroid and an iPod Touch device with a scrolling series of digital images, all reformatted using the polarizing apps. I don't know if you've seen Shake It and Colloq, and use the way in which the unusual Polaroid border has become in the digital moment the sign for photographness, even when what it frames isn't the Polaroid at all. It's sort of a way of signaling that it's a photograph when the photograph and what it is so diffuse. And then the other installation that you saw, the Shane's Glove installation, that was at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art as part of the triennial exhibition. Other questions? Yes, hi.
I'm very impressed by your work. I once took your course for the visualization and theorizing.
I remember, yes.
Visualization. Combine the two models together. One is the photographic philosophy.
I'm going to come closer to you because you don't have a microphone, so I can hear you. Hi.
According to Baudrillard, photographic things, and once the photograph is very profound. It does not stop the time. Rather, it will give you the trace, of those kind of materiality is evaporate, and give you the space of imagination called it's Lamet's telling time. You remember that?
Yes.
And then, so everything is get, unfolding, refolding, and those kind of procedure, because the genealogy of the nearness, it is like equivalent as in mathematics, a differentiation equation, and some dynamical mechanism appears. And then those kind of art is called art of disappearance, and those kind of gender demarcations all evaporate. So this kind of dynamic things, I think in your work you are always consistent, and those kind of clear questions, I think, is like a visual dynamical question. In the method, the human is more dynamical, not just like sterilized as just like this decided that the pattern or something. So the search itself is a practice of theorizing, and will constantly discover some meaning in the intimate, the space. So those kind of practice. This is the first time I saw your archive. It's very impressed, and I strengthened my belief. I think this is those kind of age, cutting edge. This is I think because of the queer world, they have those kind of distillerized, those kind of sharpening their insight, and give the visual space to display, and finally subvert the established ground. So we call it the groundless ground. This kind of the human prejudice, and I just like my question is is this the line, you starting practice it in which year? 70s, 80s,
when did I start practicing?
Yeah.
1991.
1991, yeah. You curve along this line, and then you keep practicing, you know. You do see, you know, those different stages, you know, you getting through, you know, and what is your newest discovery in this kind of, you know, practice?
Well, I mean, I showed you all a very small sample in that I wanted to make this, I understood that instead of just a kind of tour through, here's a career, that these were talks that might best be done as an argument about a particular series of questions. And so I pulled those projects that use the SX70 Polaroid and that think about the complex interrelationship and slippage between public and private, but also think feel with the complex temporality of the image. So the Polaroid, right, famous for being instant. Photography generally discussed in terms of capturing time, freezing time, but also so often as with its effect of vivid effect of the index, right, the sign that would seem to be made by its object. And this is a work, right, in Roland Barthes so famously argues that what pierces us is, in the other direction, is the way in which that photographic sign gives us a sense of that has been, right? So it gives us an illusion of presence only to take it away. But the temporality that I've also been pushing in this talk is a sense that that index could also work the other way. So toward the as if, or the what might be, or what might yet be, and a sense of the photograph is not at all resolved, but as a scene, a situation that continues to develop. And continues to develop not necessarily progressively, right? So that's one notion of development, but develop in the sense of continuing to come into appearance, but also disappearance in the precariousness of its itineraries and also interactions. Some other thoughts or, yeah.
Hi. I was wondering about, I mean, once upon a pre-digital time, right? Like Polaroids were used because they could fix an image, right? Without having to go to the dark room and pull it out of the back. But I was wondering what, first of all, how you could use the vocabulary of the Polaroid, this filtered polarized light, if that informs your practice theoretically, or if just more generally the terms of the photography, such as like latency, fixing, development, even likeness itself, if those are, if the vocabulary of the Polaroid, vocabulary of photography, whether terms or a method of doing things, how that informs the theoretical practice, right? Or how you use that, what might be termed the everyday practice of photography after you click the shutter. And of course, I don't do anything, so I don't really know what that involves. But how you use that then to push this theoretical argument. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there are many pieces there to pull out. One would be that a kind of deliberate and perverse playing with the camera that's a toy, that's not a fine art tool. I mean, I could certainly do a genealogy in which I point to all the famous and established artists that the Polaroid Corporation very calculatedly sent Polaroid cameras to. I could tell you that Andy Warhol used Polaroid as a way of making the shots that became the basis for the celebrity portraits. I could point to the ways in which Robert Mapplethorpe used the Polaroid camera in ways that are strikingly similar formally to the work that's more well-known and also more contested, so that I could then also say that not only does the Polaroid hinge in a complicated way in between being this relatively inexpensive toy, but also deliberately marketed sexy accessory, and we'd also would have to think about its naming, right? SX70, Sex 70, for the swinging 70s, introduced in 1972. And I've been thinking a lot as well about the ways in which that that camera that hinges in between the everyday banal, but also the art tool in between what would seem to be family practice. You know, use this to capture your moments of togetherness, the heteronormative family picnic, and also because it made it possible not only to not have to know about how to use the difficult chemicals of the darkroom, but also meant that you didn't have to send your roll of film to the local developer. And this is a age, right, where the extent to which we're surveilled follows different tracks. And yet it's at once this device of art and banality, this device of the family album, and this device of, all kinds of an accessory to the ways of intensifying and making more profound a furtive sex act that one might not want to send to the local developer. And it's that oscillation that I find theoretically really exciting. It's also the case that its uncertain status in between the logic of photography as the definition of the postmodern condition of the ways in which we seem unable to control the image. That is the device that so obviously represents what Walter Benjamin called the work of art, or we could also say the image in the age of its mechanical reproducibility, that device that somehow inevitably generates multiples, that can and is repeated and therefore circulated. Strangely, the Polaroid makes a single object. And it's that way in which the kind of now signature for the photograph or photographedness. And I haven't done this here, but I've been dying to do a talk in which I do this kind of tour through advertising, through moments in film in which it's not necessarily actually a Polaroid, but that Polaroid border comes in crucially as a way of signifying a reckoning with the extent to which we are or not the images cast onto us, and the extent to which there might be some gap of possibility within a regime of subjectivity that's still, we could say, controlled by an echo that's no less potent of the photograph and the photographic ID as the means of subjection, right? You cannot cross a border without a passport photo. And even if we no longer carry, it would seem, those material object passports, that the image and passport image photographic ID still seems to be a controlling device. And yet, the Polaroid, at the same time, seems like a kind of way of remobilizing that persistent citation of the photograph and yet showing up the extent to which